What's up, y'all? Welcome back to No Table Talk. It's your boy, Otumba. First of all, I feel the need to apologize for not keeping up with my intended schedule of putting out content or putting out episodes. I have been very, very occupied with the different duties and assignments that I have in my life, especially the ones that have recently commenced. Without going into much detail, long and short of it, I have been busy in some sense, which I think is a good segue into what I want to talk about today, what I want to expound on today. This topic is a table that I have had myself on recently, actually lots of times in the past, but it's applied to me more recently, hence it being on my mind. What I want to talk about today is excuses. In thinking about this, I realized that for every plan that wasn't followed through on, for every agenda that was absconded, for every intention that wasn't followed through on, one common denominator for the most part is excuses. And I was thinking of excuses. I was thinking of the excuses I have for not putting out content, as I apologized for earlier. I was thinking of excuses I've had for not doing certain things I used to do before, or not keeping up with certain tasks that I intended to keep up with, and just different excuses I've given over the course of my life. And trust me, I've given a hell of excuses. A lot of excuses in different stages of my life for different reasons, and in order not to follow through on certain things, or maybe to even maybe to even give reason or to justify certain lapses that I have possessed or that I have seen in myself. You feel me? But I want to talk about excuses. In me thinking of excuses, I realized that not all excuses are necessarily bad. Like I said before, for every plan that wasn't followed through on, what exists is an excuse. For every intention that was previously stated that was then not fulfilled, what you would find in the midst of that is an excuse. Really, for anything, even for the things we do. It really doesn't only apply to the things we don't do, or the things we fail on, or the things we falter on. But sometimes a lot of the things we do, we have excuses for doing those things. So in me thinking of excuses, I was saying to myself, okay, excuses don't necessarily have to be bad. Excuses are not necessarily bad things. I mean, even just looking at the dictionary definition of an excuse, it's just a reason for something not to, you know what? I'm gonna look it up. Alright, so it says excuse, the act of excusing, a little on the nose, something offered as justification or as grounds for being excused. Okay. An expression of regret for failure to do something. Okay. A note of explanation of an absence. Okay. This definition is interesting. Something offered as justification or as grounds. Keyword justification. I feel like that's really the basis of how or whether an excuse is really warranted or valid or not. You feel me? And like I said before, we have excuses for different things. Some excuses could be justifiable, like the definition I read. Some could not be justifiable. And I mean, that's pretty much common sense. I mean, we all know that. But what I really want to expound on today, what I really want to go off of today, is how subjective the justification of our excuses can be. Because me speaking personally, me thinking of the excuses I have, or I had, for, let's say, not putting out content over the past week, as I'd have loved to, as I intended to. Me saying to myself, or me setting out a plan, and not just setting out a plan and putting it on paper, but actually saying it to my audience. Wow. I feel like the more I talk, the more I just break down whatever excuses I had. But me even going the extra mile to say it to my audience and state out my intended plan of putting out a video every week or putting out content every week. Me strategizing and stating that as my plan. The fact that I didn't follow through on those things, excuses had to be present. You feel me? Excuses that could be justifiable to some people, may not be justifiable to some people. Me speaking personally, especially with me trying to make myself feel at ease or feel at peace with the decisions I made of not really even recording anything over the past week, or with me not putting out any content over the past week. I thought of reasons to make it justifiable to myself. They could be in a certain sense. They could be to a lot of people. But when I say excuses, the justifiability of an excuse is very subjective. I feel like it then boils down to the standard that you place yourself or that you place on yourself, if that makes sense. For example, I could have an excuse for a certain action, and to some people, sometimes to the vast majority of people, sometimes to even everybody, it could be understandable. But then, if the standards are raised, some people could look at me and be like, okay, I understand. It makes sense. It makes sense that you wouldn't do that. Or it makes sense how you found reasons, or you found these reasons to not follow through on something you said you were going to do. But, Corey, really, I mean, you know that you could have made it work if you really wanted to make it work. You feel me? That's them raising the standards. Me personally, especially with whatever prompted me to start this video off by apologizing. Me personally, I have elevated standards for myself. And I realized that even though the excuses I had to not put out content or to not have any content ready for the past week, even though those excuses are understandable, even though those excuses could be justifiable to some, deep down inside, I knew that if I really wanted to make it work, I would have made it work. Did I want to make it work? Yes. Did I rest on the reasons that I found to not make it work? I did. Were those reasons justifiable? They could be. Were they justifiable by my standards? Probably not. You get me? And I would love us to apply that same mindset to ourselves. It's the same mindset I'm applying to myself moving forward. It's the same mindset I applied to myself to even record this video. Because whatever reasons I had over the past week or 2 weeks or whatever, they still exist. Those duties that I mentioned or that I hinted at, they still exist. If anything, probably even more. You get what I'm saying? And then if you're not hip hop, whatever burdens I may say I have to justify me not being in the right space, long and short of it, it's all BS, according to me, by my standards. To other people, it could be very justifiable. You know what? Some people might even give me those excuses and I could be like, okay, alright, I understand. Well, you take it easy, sort out whatever you need to sort out. But by the standards in which I've placed on myself, by the standards in which I've placed on the content I put out, by the standards in which I've placed on my platform, be No Table Talk, irrespective of audience, by the standards of the quality that I have put on it, whatever excuses I had were not justifiable by my standards. You feel me? That's what I mean by the justifiability of your excuses is very, very subjective. And well, the truth is, I could have said these excuses to anybody, and it's really on them to say, to understand or to not understand. It's really on them to say to me, okay, that makes sense. Or they could be like, Corey, that's BS. You come on. I mean, get me. It's really on them. Whatever they said, based on the standards they have, based on the standards they placed on me, whatever they said, I still could have taken with a grain of salt. At the end of the day, it boiled down to me. But I probably didn't even say it to anybody because I I probably knew that the people that I could have said it to could have understood, but at the back of their minds, they would be like, I mean, you could do better. Especially me thinking of the last video I put out. Wow, I'm really breaking my own tables. Especially me thinking of the last video I put out. I said that things will always keep popping up. There would always be something. You would always have a reason. We would always have an excuse. We would always have an excuse. I don't think it's ever really totally convenient, per se. Either way, even if we have nothing to do, we could just be tired. It could be an excuse. There's always something. There will always be something. But then it's the standards you place on yourself. Are those excuses justifiable to you? Is my point. Like I said, me even recording this video was me coming from a place of realizing that whatever excuse I had to not be diligent with the things I had proposed to do, irrespective of whether I had said it on a public platform or whether I had commitments to any other person, just commitments to myself, commitments to my platform, commitments to my content, commitments to my assignments. You feel me? The excuses were not justifiable enough for me not to even, I don't even think they're justifiable enough for me to even miss a week. They could be understandable, but if I wanted to really make it work, if I wanted to stretch myself more than I had stretched myself, I could have made it work. I know that I'm saying all of this in the context of my own standards, but that's really exactly what it is. It's based on the standards I place for myself. So I want us to encourage us to really think of this as it applies to us. As I'm thinking of it as it applies to me. I'm really thinking of it in other areas of my life. In the other assignments I have to do. Sometimes it's even stuff I'm still doing, but I'm not doing at the quality that I know I should be doing it at. There's certain lapses in the quality of the work I'm putting in. You get what I'm saying? Or there's certain lapses in the effort I'm putting in, based on certain excuses that I have cultivated or I have found, or I have decided to rest on. You feel me? Especially me speaking as a Christian. I could come up with a lot of excuses for reasons why I do things or I don't do things. But because I place myself on a certain standard, I evaluate myself by a certain objective standard. Standards that are not of my qualification. Standards are of the qualification of God. A lot of the time we realize that some of those excuses are BS. Some of those excuses could be understandable by us humans. But even in you sharing those excuses with other humans that are of the same faith, they would express their they would express their comprehension of the excuse, but would also express or should also express the invalidity of that excuse based on a higher standard of righteousness. You get me? But that's just on the faith side, of my belief side, of my general worldview side, my personal worldview side. But generally, but then again, like I said, it's subjective. Your standards may not be that high. And then that's an indictment on yourself. And then I guess that's you having to evaluate the standards you place on yourself. What standards do you see yourself, or what standards do you demand yourself to operate at? You get me? If we really evaluate the excuses we have, the excuses we've given to stop doing certain things, or to not be diligent in certain things we do, or to not uphold the duties that we have in place in our hands, or to just do better. Get me? To just do better, especially in the face of criticism. To just not do better. Because, I mean, especially in the face of criticism, especially that, when we're criticized for certain things, especially when there are behavioral lapses, a lot of the times we find ourselves giving excuses, especially when other people are involved. We give excuses on it being the fault of other people. We give excuses on our situation or the state of our situation being the reason why we're acting in a certain way, or the way we've been treated, or our experiences, which could be justifiable, which could be understandable. Let me say justifiable. It could be understandable, but are they really reason enough? Are our standards really that much hinged on other people's actions? Our standards really that much hinged on how we've been treated? Especially with that being void of our own personal responsibility to handle life as we've been presented it, or to make lemonade out of our lemons, out of the lemons that life serves us. Our excuse is really justifiable. I guess at the end of the day, only we can say it, because even with other people's perception of us, other people could call your excuses as BS. And maybe that's just them holding you to a higher standard than you hold yourself. It's very, very possible that they could be holding you to unrealistic standards. Very, very possible. But it's also very, very possible that they could be holding you to realistic standards. Standards that they assumed you should hold yourself up to. Standards that you obviously don't see yourself at. And now you have to think to yourself, what standards do I uphold myself to? In me resting on my laurels of, for lack of a better word, in me resting on my laurels of incompetence, is that me holding myself to substandard qualities that I'm supposed to uphold? I feel more for the most part, even when the excuses we give ourselves, we know deep down. Again, subjective. It's subjective. This is me speaking to people who hold themselves to adequate standards, from the range of adequate to high standards, as it pertains to you. When you really digest the excuses, especially me speaking personally from experience, when you really digest excuses, you see the holes in them. You call the BS to yourself. Deep down you know. I feel like excuses are really just us giving ourselves reasons to cope with the incompetence that we've expressed. Whether it's in you failing to do something or in you doing something. I feel like excuses for the most part, some excuses for the most part, I know some could be very justifiable, but some excuses for the most part are us just allowing ourselves to cope with our incompetence, to live with it, for lack of a better word. So I want to encourage us. Yes, we have excuses. Excuses will never end. They will never stop. We would always have excuses to either lapse in certain duties, or excuses to act in certain ways or to say certain things. We would always have excuses. But I want us to evaluate those excuses. Are those excuses justifiable for you? Are those excuses justifiable for you? Going back to even my faith, I think of when we eventually are before our Creator, and when our lives have been evaluated. And when the happenings of our lives are being recounted back to us, when you're asked, when you're inquired of certain decisions you made, certain things you did, certain things you said, how you acted, how you lived your life in general, I can imagine we would have excuses, just as we have excuses as we're living the life right now. I imagine we'd have excuses, but I would also imagine that when we're at that point, the realization of those excuses not being up to par hits us, because now we're at a point where the opportunity to continue to cope with those incompetences has passed. That's a heavy topic. But I'm just using that as an example, or I'm using that as a hint to the standards we should hold ourselves to. I'm using that as a hint to the standards to which we should evaluate our excuses, evaluate the reasons for why we do things, or the reasons why we don't do certain things. You feel me? Long and short of it, do better. I feel like that's the general motto of all my episodes. Do better. But in this case, do better with the excuses we allow ourselves to just live with. Like I said, it's very, very subjective. The excuses I had for not putting out content or for not doing the things I had proposed to do could be very, very justifiable to a lot of people. But for me, it wasn't good enough. So yeah, once again, I appreciate you guys. I hope you were blessed as usual. I hope this episode has prompted some thoughts in your head, has gingered some thoughts in your head. I hope this episode has caused you to be highly introspective and evaluate ourselves as I'm evaluating myself. And hope we find the areas we need to adjust. Maybe you think to yourself and you're like, yeah, my excuses are very, very justifiable. Or maybe we call out our own BS. Maybe we see the holes in our excuses and we do better. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, hopefully we do better. So appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you for being a part of my content. And I would see you next week with a new episode. Appreciate you guys, man. Have a blessed day. And peace.
Sit back, relax, and chill. Grab a glass of wine or a cup of tea, 'cause you're listening to No Table Talk.